right, everybody. We've got another very special guest for y'all. Please welcome to the show, Mike Scrase. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Hello.
Hey.
Couldn't tell which hand was actually in shot there. I went to go wave with this hand, and I was like, "Oh, that's off frame."
No, he's just standing still. Hey, thanks for being here from across the pond. You traveled so far to be here, so thanks.
Yes, through the power of the information superhighway.
Yeah, it makes traveling a lot faster. Thanks for being here, Mike. It's your first time, so we have to do the annoying thing of asking your origin story in comics before we talk about your Project Zip, because it is really cool. But so what brought it all about for you and making a comic and things like that?
When I was a kid, I used to read a comic based on Sonic the Hedgehog, but it wasn't the Archie comics that Americans might be familiar with. It was actually the British version, which many of your viewers may not even be aware was a thing. But it was its own sort of universe with its own rules. Basically, Sega gave the creators of that comic a Bible about how the characters were generally supposed to be and sort of style guides and everything, but they just left it to the creators other than that. So they basically just ran wild and introduced all kinds of crazy stuff, and it was really, really good. So also this was a weird comic because it was based on a game character. It was part comic, part game magazine, because they would have these comics in a kind of short form type, there'd be 4 strips per comic, but there would also be game reviews and tip sections. As a kid, I hoarded a bunch of old issues of this thing because it was before the internet was widely available,
right?
And not necessarily obscure games weren't necessarily going to be, there wouldn't be information about them on the internet anyway. So I just hoarded a bunch of game magazines, so I had cheat codes and things. But it was the only way I could beat some of the harder games as a kid. But the comics themselves were amazing.
That's awesome.
Can
I
Chris?
You'll enjoy this. This is how much smarter the Brits are than us. They named it Sonic the Comic.
Right.
Wow.
Well,
I
mean, it's a bit because when you say Sonic the Comic, people just think you mean the comic version of Sonic the Hedgehog.
Right.
So I don't know how smart it actually was, because now fans have nicknamed it the Fleetway one, but British people call it Sonic the Comic because we know what we're talking about. But when you're talking about the internet, usually say the Fleetway one or the Fleetway Egmont one, because nobody just people just assume you mean Archie or maybe even IDW these days, because IDW is doing them these days. But
and it's a lot more in tune with the video game and stuff like that.
Which I personally argue that that's not necessarily a good thing, because the video games don't actually have that much story.
Right.
Or at least the story they have is very disjointed. One game has a completely different tone to the next, and the continuity of the story doesn't really follow from one game to another.
I thought it was funny. The newest game hired the writers for the comic to come in and be write a story for this, because
don't get me wrong. There have been elaborate stories in Sonic games. It's just that they don't really follow on from one to the next. They'll throw in a reference every now and then, but it's not this game's happening because the previous game's happening. It's just more episodic.
It's Eggman's back.
I mean, sometimes not even that, because sometimes some of them are there's aliens now and they're weird. And
so it's always interesting when we get some insight into other comics in other countries, because you're right. I didn't have any idea about this. I know Chris is a big Sonic fan. Did you have any idea about this, Chris?
No, I had no clue.
And about what specifically?
No, because I've read the old Archie stuff.
Oh, right. You didn't know about Sonic the Comic, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I really, really recommend it. Okay, so if we're talking Sonic fan to Sonic fan, the great thing about Sonic the Comic, one of the best things about it was their depiction of Super Sonic. Because unlike the games where Super Sonic is essentially just a carbon copy of Goku as the Super Saiyan, they've basically turned Super Sonic into essentially a demon that Sonic turns into when he's either his he can't control his stress, or he's exposed to chaos radiation, which is basically what the Chaos Emeralds have in Sonic the comic. And basically, it's like a wild card character because he doesn't come out all of the time. But anytime the stakes are really, really high, there's a chance that he'll turn into Supersonic and make the stakes even higher, because Supersonic is not a good guy in Sonic the comic. He's like this insane psychopath who just wants to destroy everything. And also, he's like, in terms of his power level, he's like on par with Superman. Like, he's insanely powerful. The only reason that anyone survives is because he just enjoys toying with people. He doesn't like to just kill you like that. He wants to toy with you first. And so the only chance you have to beat him is to try and stall for long enough for him to change back into regular Sonic and not want to murder you on sight.
It's like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde.
Yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about all of the really cool stuff in Sonic the comic, but
Chris is like ordering all the backlog right now.
I'm finding.
Oh my god! Yeah, definitely do. It's so good. It's so good.
So, Mike, I found a reason for you to get into Sonic the comic too.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
So, in some of the issues of Sonic the comic, it was like, it seems like they did other Sega IP. So there's a Streets of Rage series in there.
Oh,
and take a guess. Take a guess who wrote it, Mike.
Streets of Rage.
Well, Mark Miller worked on some of Streets of Rage.
No way.
Yes.
No way.
He did. He did.
Oh man.
He did. Yeah. He wasn't. Yeah. Well, Mark Miller wrote some of the Sonic stuff as well, actually.
Wow.
Yeah, he's credited in quite a few issues.
Yeah, Mark Miller's a bit of a controversial figure. I mean,
Oh, go on. I want to know your thoughts on it, because I don't think I've ever asked.
Because, like, the thing is that, like, I have enjoyed some Mark Miller stuff, okay? I'll just say that. But if you go back and read Kick-Ass 2...
Yeah.
It had been a long time since I've been reading Kick-Ass 2, and I kind of vaguely remembered the stuff with Dave's girlfriend, and I don't even know if I can talk about it here, because it's really, like... But... You know, I mean, what kind of do you guys put an age certificate on this podcast? Because we're going to have to
go for it.
Right,
go for it.
Because to talk about this, we're going to have to say the R, the four-letter R word. So basically, in Kick-Ass 2, the villain of Kick-Ass 2 basically rapes the main character's girlfriend. Well, he's not her girlfriend. He's his girlfriend. He's got a crush on her.
Right.
And he only does it to get under his skin. And I was sorting through my old comics the other day, and I found an issue of it where they were arguing about this. You know, the Kick-Ass goes, "You raped my girlfriend," and the villain goes, "She's not your girlfriend." And I'm like, "This is what you care about? She raped a woman." Like, and so yeah, sometimes like you read an old Mark Miller comic and you go, "Oh fuck's sake, Mark, what are you doing?" Like,
yeah,
Mike, I recently read Wanted, like within the year.
Oh god, yeah.
And that is the edgiest comic
I've
ever read. And
So the thing is-
to me, like I'm putting my mind back to that time period where Millar is and trying to make a name for himself.
Yeah.
And this was literally him trying to get headlines. That's all that book was.
Yeah.
It's a great premise. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, I mean, there are things about the books that I like. I do think that Mark Miller has a way of writing a character who is a real asshole, but he can make them likable anyway, which is an interesting skill to have. So I do think that he has
kind of like his personality, really.
Yeah.
It's just how he.
I think he's calmed down a little bit from that in his later career. Like I haven't seen the edge. I mean, I don't read everything he does, but even like Nemesis now isn't as edgy as the original Nemesis book was.
Right.
Yeah, and then if you get into Mark Miller, the person as well, he's got some very controversial.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how wise it is for us to get into this topic too far.
It's good. We'll bring it back to the origin, because I mean, Chris and I are always fascinated by the comics that we don't get to see or know about in the US. So
right.
Like there was a Sega / comic, a Sega property that was doing comics of Streets of Rage, which I'm a huge fan of, and Sonic that Chris is a huge fan of. We have no idea about it.
Well, that was the good thing about, you did mention that Sonic the comic also did other Sega properties in their comic. They didn't do that so much later on, but in the earlier days they did cover like Streets of Rage. Shining Force.
Shining Force. Wow. Yeah.
Most people won't remember this game anymore, but they did like a Sparkster Rocket Knight
Oh man.
comic strip.
Wow.
Decap Attack was one that kept going for years and years and years, which is a game that didn't even sell that. It wasn't even that popular. But it was. They just made it into like a slapstick, like a weird slapstick comic.
Mm-hmm.
It was essentially like, what if? It was almost like, what if Young Frankenstein were a Tom and Jerry cartoon kind of thing?
Crazy.
Yeah, and so I think that's why it kept going for so long, even though the game is like barely heard of these days. Wow. The comic itself that it was based on was so popular that it just kept going for almost the entire, stretch of the comics run.
I mean, the way you described it, Young Frankenstein, Tom and Jerry, I would read the crap out of that.
Yeah, then you really have to get into Sonic the comic. It's like, if you're just expecting it to be like a Sonic game, it's not like that. I mean, they do adaptions of Sonic games, but like, it finished, like the comics run finished in the 90s, so the last game adaptation they did was Sonic Adventure, which came out in 99.
Mm-hmm.
So they only adapt the earlier games anyway, and they just have their own way of adapting it anyway. It's not like they follow the plot beat for beat. They just kind of do their own thing, which was like a big strength of that comic. Not to say that I hate all other Sonic media, it's just that they had a very specific way of doing Sonic, and I just think that the fact that they didn't compromise on that was
they weren't constrained by someone like IDW or something.
Yeah,
like you got
at the time, Archie.
Because people are always, a lot of American Sonic fans are always like, "Oh, we hate the art in Sonic the comic. We love Ian Flynn." Not Ian Flynn. He's the writer. We love you, Tracy Yardley, and Tracy Yardley's good. But I like the more. I feel like Sonic the comic is more experimental, whereas Archie's art style these days, in the later years, was more sort of like paint by numbers, kind of what Sega wanted, whereas they just sort of did what they wanted on Sonic the comic,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you're reading Sonic the comic, and then what's the progression after that to get to Zip, like making your own comic, reading stuff every week? You had a pull list, or?
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, it was a lot harder for a long time to get comics in the UK than it was in the US, because our options generally, if you go into a newsagent and buy like a comic, your options are like Beano and Dandy and stuff like that. And I did read those comics, but they're not really like, those are more kind of comics for like, well, there are people who get super into Beano and Dandy and things, but for me, those are more like, you're in the doctor's waiting room and you read a comic to pass the time. Like, but like we don't, over here it was really like go to a specialist store. You just don't get, American comics, and you don't really get a whole big selection of comics from around the world. Regardless, you basically just get like the usual type, cartoon strip type comics a lot of the time. So yeah, I mean, after STC, as we call it, like they stopped. It was a long time after I read comics that, like the cinema, superheroes started becoming popular in cinema, and then it became sort of viable for more specialist shops to open up in the UK. And I wanted to go and get comics because I missed my, old Sonic comics. I loved just like the format of a comic. And also, I was a fan of like Spider-Man and like Spawn and stuff. I got a little Spawn comic free with an action figure that I first bought when I was a kid, so I knew nothing else about the character. But I just thought his design looked cool because I'm an edgy 90s boy.
Yeah.
Not as edgy as Mark Miller, but
fair enough.
But yeah, so I just got picked back comics back up then. I mean, I went to film school, and I still, work in film, but it's kind of like, those kind of do require a large team. If you're going to do a Kickstarter for a film, you need to raise like
a lot.
Well, yeah. I mean, even if you're doing a small film, you need to raise a lot more than you need to raise for a comic. And I I mean, you look at film Kickstarters and they don't do as well a lot of the time as comic Kickstarters. I think often because the filmmakers just aren't. It's kind of a self, it's kind of a bit of a vicious cycle, really, because film projects don't really get funding on Kickstarter, so people don't fund them. So there's no real community of film projects on Kickstarter. Whereas with comic creators are supporting each other all the time. Mm-hmm. But you go to a film Kickstarter and you look at the number of projects they backed, it's always 0, and then this is their first time, and it's they're asking for 20 grand, and it's a little bit I'm not sure if that's the most realistic goal for your first campaign, especially when you haven't ever engaged with the community by the looks of it.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's, in giant air quotes for the audio listeners, easier for a comic creator to build an audience on Kickstarter because you keep coming back. And then you're talking, and hopefully you're doing it right, and you're helping other people, and you're talking to them, and then you guys are collaborating, and you can kind of build a network. Where you do a film, and it takes you how long? A year and a half, 2 years?
I have, I have a lot of friends who work in film. I work in film, but and I've had people from that industry come to me because they know that I've had successful Kickstarters under my belt, and they've asked me about it. And I've had people that I know say, "Oh, I don't think that this type of film can be successful on Kickstarter, and I don't think this kind of project can be." And I always say to them, "No, it can be successful on Kickstarter. It's just that you're thinking about it the wrong strategy." Mm-hmm. Sometimes, there's projects that are better suited to get people directly from Kickstarter, and there's projects that are better suited to get people from external platforms, pull that from, your mailing list or your website or your social media or whatever. And, that with that second strategy there, the hurdle is that you're going to have to sell them on Kickstarter as a concept, which does mean you've got an extra layer because you've got to sell them on your project and you've got to sell them on Kickstarter. And that is a hurdle. I'm not going to pretend like it's not a hurdle, but it's not insurmountable. Mm-hmm. And the first step is to, before you ever think about, solidly thinking about launching a campaign, is to use Kickstarter and back projects and learn what you like. And when you see something that you think is cool and you think your friends will like, send them it, because then they'll see, oh, I like this, I'll sign up to Kickstarter for this reason. And then you just basically, you just sign up your friends into signing up for Kickstarter so that when you do launch a project, you don't have to get all of them to sign up to Kickstarter because they already are. But when I say sign up, but I genuinely love Kickstarter as a platform. You can get so much cool stuff on there, not just comics. Mm-hmm. So, it's just, if you're thinking, if you're a creative listening to this and you think, well, I can't do a project because my project won't get things on Kickstarter, maybe it will. Maybe you just have to be the person who, makes it a thing. If it isn't a thing, just make it a thing. Right.
You're the one stopping it from becoming a thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to start somewhere, and I can't, guarantee anybody success, but just don't give up before you try.
Yeah. I mean, you talked about a couple successful Kickstarters now, so I guess we could just get into Zip.
Okay. Yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah, and I got through most of the first issue because just timing wise, I got to read some of it before the interview, but. You label it as a grungy a superhuman comic, grungy, and I would say from the first issue. So and you could talk about the description of the hero and everything like that, but I think I like the approach of having a superhero that's rooted in a realistic environment, or there's a downside to having your powers.
Yeah,
whether that be a physical ailment, whether it's taking a toll on your relationships or emotions or something like that. Because I always thought it was a cool idea to take a realistic approach to having powers, and you say grungy, so it's not always going to be sunshine and rainbows. But do you want to just talk about what Zip is, and then maybe a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, the whole thing is, the situation with there being downside to having powers is all an analogy for disability.
Right.
I was born visually impaired, and a long time ago I was reading an article by cracked.com. It was an article that was 7 awesome superpowers ruined by science. One of them was super speed, one of them was immortality, there was one about super strength, and they were all pointing out these things like, for example, if you lived forever, eventually your mind would atrophy because, there's only many memories your mind can store.
Right.
It doesn't have infinite space for memories, and so eventually it's just going to kind of, get more and more degraded as it tries to remember things. Because if your mind is like a hard drive, there's only so much physical like circuit board or tree.
Yeah, right.
In a hard drive. That's a computer science term, by the way. Computer circuitry, just board tree.
Very technical terms.
Yeah. And so that, and there's also the fact that if you're immortal, you're inevitably going to get stuck forever in some place because eventually there's going to be an earthquake and you're just going to get sandwiched between two tectonic plates or something and just be stuck there for the rest of eternity until the earth explodes. Mm-hmm. And then you're just left to float out in space forever. But the main character has super speed, and you may be able to guess that the reason I chose the main character to have super speed is one of those reasons was, my love of Sonic the Hedgehog. Another reason was being, visually impaired. I can't get a driver's license, so I kind of always wished I had super speed, so I wouldn't have to have a car. I could just run everywhere. And the other reason was this Cracked article just made me think that was probably going to be the best person to have the, be the protagonist. So Zip, being super fast. She also has super fast reactions, but she can't just turn them off and on because that's not really like how perception works. So everyone she talks to sounds extremely slow, like that sloth from that one movie.
Yeah, right.
They sound like this.
Yep.
And conversely, when she talks to anyone, because she's, she does everything fast, but if she wants to be understood, she's going to have to, slow herself down because she sounds like one of the Alvin and the Chipmunks on speed, unless she slows herself down. So it can be very difficult for her to talk to people. She's also her entire body's fast. So, her sleep-wake cycle is double what most people would be. So she needs to sleep twice as often, but for half as long, which makes it very, very difficult for her to hold down, like a day job because she's going to get, an 8-hour shift to her feels like she's been awake for like 16 hours.
Right.
She needs to eat twice as much. She needs to eat large portions as well because, all that energy burning from being super fast. And, she's also aging much faster. So she's only got a life of expectancy of around 40 or 50 years old because her heartbeat's much faster.
Mm. Okay.
It kind of reminds me, you're obviously going way more in depth than the story I'm talking about, but there was an issue, I think it was Avengers, where Quicksilver
yes,
he's a dick because he's like, if you had to slow everything down, you'd be a dick too.
Okay, first of all, it's really funny because I need to read this comic now, and I think it was actually X-Force because 2 out of 3 of the podcasts that I've spoken to in the past 2 weeks I've mentioned this comic, and they've said X-Force, so I'm going to have to track this specific comic down. But so it's funny though, because in my original idea for Zip, she was a lot more bitter, and she was also a man. In fact, the reason that she was called Zip in my first drafts was because she just didn't care, and so she just came up with the first stupid name she could think of. That evolved to me thinking more in the lines of like, just some average person making a nickname for themselves wouldn't necessarily have like a marketing team behind them to come up with a really cool name. Right. So they might just come up with something silly called like Zip, which is in the universe of the comic. She explains this is just the sound that she makes when she runs past you. So that's the reason she called herself that. But yeah, I'm gonna have to read that comic because you're not the first person who's mentioned this to me.
Yeah,
that's funny. Yeah,
that's what happens when you go on a comic podcast. That's all you have to talk about is all these old floppy issues that we've been reading for years.
But you say going into more detail about it. I mean, that's kind of the central premise of the comic is viewing superpowers as analogy for disability. I mean, what I've listed to you now isn't necessarily even where the issues that she has end. So issue 2 deals with the fact that when she's very stressed out, she kind of shakes, but because she's super fast, she shakes really, really fast. So her touch can actually basically accelerate particles, kind of like a super collider. Okay. And so when she becomes very, very stressed and she doesn't have control over her body, her touch can actually explode things and people. So she can end up hurting people completely inadvertently, which was an idea that our artist had. He's Argentinian, and I wasn't quite sure what he was getting at when he suggested this idea to me at first, but we talked about it, and I was like, okay. And, at first I was like, oh, this is a odd idea, but then I thought about it, and the more I thought about it, the more it's actually sounded like a great idea. And the second issue of the comic, that's basically the like a linchpin of the story now. Originally, it was just like, oh, this would be a cool idea for a scene. And then I thought about it, and I thought, oh, no, Sam's idea is actually the plot of issue 2, pretty much.
Cool. And you have Santiago Espina doing the art, right?
That's right, yeah.
And I would say when you say a grunge comic, I'd say the art is really good. I mean, I like the black and white style, but I think the art is very punk rock. Sam's
stuff looks so good in black and white, and you don't really see many black and white comics these days, and it just makes me think of indie comics, which I just like the look of that. Like I was saying on another podcast the other day, I'm a really big fan of the original Mirage Studios run of the Ninja Turtles. Back when it was just 2 guys. Making a comic out of their apartment, and it doesn't help hurt that it's cheaper too, to commission that and print it.
Yep.
But
I think his art definitely brings helps with the tone of the comic too.
I mean, it was a bit of a toss up because you generally think of a lot of color language when you talk about superheroes, but I did think maybe we could go in a bit of a different direction.
And
I think he does a great job of shading with his black and white that makes it work.
Even without the color. Well, I mean, the other thing that he does really, really well is paneling. A lot of the panels are very, very. He'll tell a story in his panels just from the shape of the gutter. In a lot of the pages, where you're going to see that too in the new issue that we've got on Kickstarter now. For example, I loved it when we've got a new character being introduced, because Zip is one of many superhumans in this world that has issues due to their the complications that their superpowers cause for their body, and the new character we're introducing is actually a retired superhero named Sunflare. He's got fire powers, and when San introduced him, he did that with the gutter around Sunflare's body is shaped like a little fireball.
That's cool.
It was a nice little subtle thing that San included.
That's awesome. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned it already, issue 3, so it's on Kickstarter. There's a pre-launch page since launching soon, but what can we expect in issue 3 that we haven't seen yet as a progression of what Zip's been up to?
Well, issue 3, there were 2 characters from the first issue who they were always referred to this in the script, but you're actually going to see them referred to it as in dialogue now in the third issue. Pinstripe and Dogspotty, they're 2 shady characters who kind of have been running experiments in the background looking for Zip, and we're going to learn more about who they are and who they're working for in this issue, because that corporation in this issue is developing the ultimate consumer product. It's called the Hive. Basically, it's a collective artificial intelligence of nanobots who are programmed to disassemble consumer products like atomize them and then reassemble them based on all the training data that they've absorbed from these consumer products, and reconfigure the atoms into something that is, an amalgamation of those, and ostensibly create a new thing out of all of the information that they've absorbed. But because the engineers couldn't find a way to make these things autonomous and also program them with like sufficient safety features, the Hive has, because they're programmed to look for the most complex objects they possibly can, and the Hive has identified the most complex object of all: human beings. So
of course,
the Hive has escaped, and they're looking for some training data. It's you.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
Mike, I'm going to turn this around on you.
Yeah.
Why is it always engineers' fault? Explain yourself.
Yeah,
It's not engineers' fault. It's the billionaires who
there you go. Yeah.
hired the engineers.
Yeah, we're usually working for the higher ups. We don't ever get to implement our own ideas on projects.
You're always the ones on the ground floor of AIM. I see it.
Yeah. That's interesting, because I mean you already have a sense of like sci-fi, but now it's a little more horrific and reatomized.
Oh yeah, this issue gets very body horror-y. It's sort of like what's a good body horror? Like, imagine like the Terminator with body horror. It's going to be.
Even better.
So Terminator 2.
So Terminator 2. No,
well, yeah, but like there's going to be like crazy.
Yeah. And do you have a launch date yet, Seth? Like,
no specific launch date, but yeah, it's going to be like autumn or fall, if in Americanese.
Yeah, Americanese, love it.
People that do follow it and are going to be looking forward to it. Like, what kind of things can they look forward to? I'm assuming you got digital, physical. Do you have like extra covers? What kind of cool stuff can they get?
Yeah, we do have extra cover. I mean, this is right here. I've got our second issue. These are all the covers that we offer with this. This is Vanessa Cardinale's cover. This one's Sans. This one, it was Matthew Schofield. I believe that you actually had him on. Yeah.
Yep.
So we've got stickers too.
Yep.
Behind you, you'll see a poster. Wrong. What?
No, you got it.
I'm bad at it.
First time, yeah.
I meant to like gesture with my hand, but
Can you hold up the stickers again, really quick? Is that a comic book page as stickers?
It's not a comic book page as stickers. It's just kind of the way that our printer.
Okay. I like that though, because it's almost like panels of stickers.
Yeah, it does look cool, doesn't it? I mean, it's just the way that our printer got them to me, like printed out on a big sheet. I actually had to. They were actually on a massive roll of stickers, and I had to cut them all into individual little packs on a guillotine.
You had one of those things where you bring the blade down and you cut them individually.
Well, it wasn't one of the ones where you bring the blade down. It was more of you slide it into like a little safety thing, and then you slide it across like that. There's old ones. They're the ones where you bring the blade down. Those are like old school.
I'm thinking of high school when I would just play with that thing, and it's a miracle I didn't cut a finger off or something.
I use them at work all the time.
Well, I don't think those things have been OSHA compliant for a long time, have they?
No, they've been there for 60 years.
Wow.
It's America, sir. We don't care about OSHA compliance.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No.
So we're with Marcosia now. They are, issue 1 and issue 2 are available on Amazon and Drivey Comics. Mm-hmm. But you can get digital copies of the first 2 issues bundled with our next one on our current Kickstarter as well. We're going to be offering them just like I'm going to be offering the first one and the second one, individually just as add-ons as well, in case you want to get those, or catch up or whatever. But the print ones, because Marcosia doesn't offer digital comics, outside of trade paperbacks, they don't offer single issues in print format. Our Kickstarter campaign will be the only way that you can actually get like physical copies of the print single issues. So if this looks good to you, definitely, pledge to our Kickstarter.
Yeah, no, it looks good to me. It looks awesome.
The page is up for people to follow right now.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a Kickstarter page up right now. It's a pre-launch page, so you can be notified when we go live, and basically get that to your inbox to tell you when you're able to pledge.
I I think that's great. And, it's funny. So just really quick, you brought up Schofield being on the show before, but you also mentioned those two guys making a turtle comic in their
Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird.
Yeah. So Eastman was on the show a couple years ago too.
Oh,
so you share the same interview show.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It's a shame I'm not on the show at the same time as him.
Yeah. Well, next time he stops by, I'll let you know.
But then the entire interview will just be going, "I'm not worthy."
Yeah, that's the problem with high ticket guys like that. Yeah.
You've also influenced the show, Mike, where if we ever get Mark Millar on the show, we will be asking about Streets of Rage the entire time.
Oh yeah, I'll only ask about Streets of Rage.
I'm going to be looking forward to the email I get where like you guys are like, right, so Mark Miller's contacted us and he wants a boxing match.
Yeah.
With the guy who spent like half an hour slagging him off.
No, it's all right. I'm sure he's gotten worse hate mail than that.
Although I watched an interview with him and he said that he'd only been punched one time in his life. So I think I might have an edge on that boxing match.
You might. Yeah, that's your advantage. Mike, we've had such fun talking to you today.
Thank you.
We're excited for the comics, and that we said the pre-launch page is up now. To get notified when this is coming up. If you want the viewers, listeners to follow you and all the stuff you're doing, do you want to send them to a social media or something like that?
We've got a lot. I mean, when it comes to social media, it's hard to know where to send people these days because, everybody says Facebook's dead, everybody says Instagram's dead, everybody says everything's dead. Yeah. I've been trying to get into TikTok, but it's just a little. Yeah, but we have a TikTok, we have a YouTube page. We have Twitter, but that's dying too. We have Instagram, we have Facebook. Our website is zipcomic.co.uk, so I just put all of our social media on there essentially.
Great.
It's Zipcomic UK on pretty much every social media platform. So if you look for Zipcomic UK on pretty much any social media handle, you'll find us.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great.
And to everybody out there watching and or listening, you can also just check the show notes down below because I'll have links to the Amazon page so you can get issues 1 and 2, to the pre-launch page so you can follow it to look forward to issue 3, and to the Zip Comics website so you can just go there and see all the cool stuff that Mike has to offer. So make sure you do that. And Mike, thanks so much for stopping by, man. It's been a blast talking to you and learning about Sonic the Comic and Zip.
Yeah. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Okay, well, it's been a great time. Thank you.